I was never, ever, ever going to tell this story, but something happened to me last night and it dragged back the most terrifying thing that probably has ever happened to me. As you know, I've done something to my back. I've got bulging discs, and so I haven't been sleeping, which has meant that this scary story has come to the forefront again. It's re-emerged. The first time this happened, I was 16. And I had a mate, and he was one of the people that everyone just gravitated towards. He was so funny. And anyway, we went to some football trip in Sydney, and I jumped into a car with him after, and there was 4 of us, and we just took 3 days to get home and stayed in dodgy hotels and run amok and did all these naughty things and had so much fun. And so a few weeks later, we were meant to all catch up again for another little rendezvous night on the booze. But instead of hanging out with us, he decided to go to a local waterhole with some other friends. Anyway, they drank and they swam under the stars, and then he disappeared and no one could find him. And divers were brought up from Sydney to search beneath the rocks and the deep channels, and that's where they found him, and he drowned. I had never lost a friend before, and I was only 16. I was so young and I just didn't know what to do with the grief, so I kind of carried it as kids do. And a few weeks later, I'd finished a shift at a local supermarket and it was late, and I went home and I put on the TV and I kind of fell asleep in my room with the TV on. I woke up because I felt that someone was standing at the end of my bed, and I saw a man, tall, dressed in black, wearing a black hat. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I realised I'd left the TV on and he was blocking the light, so I could see the light coming from both sides of him. I panicked. I tried to scream for my dad, and he was just asleep down the hall, and the only thing that came out was this squeak. It was like my voice box was frozen, and then I was frozen, and I just couldn't move. And I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the shape of his nose, and then I realised his eyes were closed, and then suddenly he opened his eyes, and they were so red. And without saying a word, he slowly lifted his hands like this, and then he suddenly fell. An enormous weight slammed on my chest, and I could feel my shoulders being pushed into the mattress, right? I was so scared, and the whole time I'm trying to scream and scream, but no sound was coming out, and I didn't know what to do. Then I remembered my mate that had passed away, and I yelled his name, and only a whisper came out, but as soon as I said my mate's name, it all just left, the whole thing. Just the weight disappeared, he disappeared, there was nothing, just like that. The man in the black hat was gone. And 20 years later, I was working at an Aboriginal health service, and we're all sitting around at lunch. So this is 20 years on, and we're all talking about scary stories. People were talking about yowies and people being sung and all sorts of experiences that they couldn't explain. And eventually it got to me. So I told that story, and halfway through, someone picked up their phone and looked it up. And she stopped me and she said, Rach, people all over the world have described this same man. Now, when this happened, there was no internet. No one even owned a computer. And then 20 years on, we're going through all these stories about the man with the black hat with the red eyes and the same feeling of being pinned down. And they had a name for him, the Hat Man. Now, somebody who studies sleep might say it was sleep paralysis or I was having some kind of hypnagogic hallucination. But why is everyone around the world having this same dream? Anyway, we all were freaking out by it. And I left work, tried not to think about it. Eventually life took over and my kids needed to be fed, and they were only young then. I had to put them to bed and do all the things. My eldest 2 kids drifted off to sleep easily. But my youngest, I think he was about 5 at the time, he just wouldn't settle. So I stayed with him and we read books and we laughed, and eventually he fell asleep. And by then I'd calmed down too. Sometime though during the night, we'd all been asleep for a while, I was startled awake. Again, it felt like someone was standing at the end of my bed, and my heart sunk. Then I heard, Mum, Mum, and it was my son. So I pulled him up into the bed with me and I went, what's wrong, buddy? What's happening? And he said, I'm scared. I said, it's okay, Mum's here. What are you scared of? And he pointed towards his room and he said, there's a man at the end of my bed. And a wave of fear washed over me, but I kept a calm voice and I said, what's he look like? And he looked straight at me and he said, he's got black clothes on and he's wearing a black hat and he's got scary eyes. And then he paused and he said, the man in the black hat told me to tell you to stop talking about him or he'll keep visiting me. And I buried that story for 10 years until now, because last night it happened again. I need to know, who else is having this dream? Has anything like this happened to you? Because it's freaky. Put it in the comments. I want to know.